Hey, hey, hey. It's a filter free Friday, y'all. Listen, I am so glad y'all here this week. It was like the third week that I've missed attending KC 360. And if you're not familiar, it's a project here in Kansas City that is designed specifically to bring lots of different people together. I mean, if you don't know, that's called diversity, and bringing those differences or diversity together to solve one of our city's most dangerous and nefarious problems. And I remember one time that, oh, first I was invited to KC 360 by um, Alex Saragusa. He is a police officer here in Kansas City who I never got a chance to serve with them on the Kansas City Human Rights Commission. By the way, our mayor here in Kansas City has not been making appointments to um, the commissions, and so our commission is down to four people, which means that we cannot meet. So we're not doing anything in Kansas City as it relates to the Human Rights Commission's strategies that we put together for this year. Not the least of which one is accountability in policing. Specifically for the last 26 years, the state of Missouri has put out a report that says that police officers, and this is the police officers report, so this is not some third party investigation, they stop black drivers at rates greater than they stop white drivers, and basically it's racially profiling in policing, but they present the report and then don't do anything about the report. And so the Human Rights Commission had put together some thoughts and some strategies for how we were going to address that this year. We have not been able to meet because our mayor is not making appointments. So I don't know if you know that. I've written about that in the Next Page Kansas City. I've written about that to Kansas City Star. We have storied civil rights folks in our area who have been working on it and still can't make it happen. But nonetheless, Alex Saragusa, Kansas City police officer, is the way that I found out about KC 360. And what we've been trying to do is reduce the violent crime, specifically homicides in my town. So you might wonder, well, why you go to that? Well, I have a business reason for going. One of the 10 pillars is empathy, but I have a personal reason for going. Like, I was raised in Kansas City, in the heart of the city. I don't call my former neighborhood the hood. We had neighbors. Ain't no reason to take away the word neighbor. But during the height of the crack cocaine epidemic, and so there were police officers around all the time. And it's very common for folks, actually, when you live in violent space, one of the first things they suggest is that you need more police. But regularly, when I'm at the KC 360 meetings, one of the things that I bring up is that I inherently know when I'm in safe space, not because of police presence, but it's the absence of police presence. Example, recently I was in Santa Barbara, California, in a beautiful resort. All I saw were people, beautiful nature, um, buildings that align to the landscape, and nobody had to tell me I was safe. Couldn't see no police officer nowhere. Nowhere. And the next day when I was speaking, they ran through the security that they had of the property, and the person who was responsible for security didn't have that presence of a police officer. But then I realized there's an entire bubble around this place. Um, but there were no police officers present. And in fact, when you can go to any city in the world, and part of the way you know you're unsafe is because of the number of police officers there. So I just think it's interesting that when a place is violent, that the first thing people do is to say that you need police officers. Because I will tell you, in my own home, growing up, my mother wouldn't let me leave the yard because of the crack cocaine that was being sold, the number of people who were fighting, the weekly murders. I lived in 64110 zip code. It was like on the next 48 and called the like what was it, Killer City or something like that. And what's interesting is, I never thought that I would live to be the person who's always bringing up history. But because we have such short memories, I find myself filling in that gap. And there's this instrument. It's a personality assessment that I use called Myers-Briggs. And one of the ways that I get people to think about personality is to sign their name and with their dominant hand. And so if I were to sign my name with my dominant hand, I think it's beautiful, my little signature. And it's so natural. But the next thing I ask people to do is to describe, like, what does that feel like? And people look at me and they're like, what do you mean describe it? And sometimes people try to be provocative, try to demonstrate that they're smart. They think I'm asking them a question so I can trip them up. It's kind of interesting, right? Like that we get to a point where we don't even trust that in a professional development setting that we can just trust our facilitator. Like I don't have any trick assignments where I'm trying to teach you one thing or another. I'm just like, just describe how this feels. People say natural. It's hard to describe it because I don't even have to think about it because, it's just, I've been working on this thing since I was in third grade. And then I ask them to switch hands and sign their name. And people start to go, oh, well, even me right now, right? Like just holding this marker in my hand feels weird because I don't usually write with this hand. What's even more interesting is that I was left-handed as a child. I broke my arm when I was 5, almost 5, and I never switched back. And it's still uncomfortable for me to sign my name with this hand. But I ask people to go ahead and do it right. And then when I try to do it, like I can't even, and I, it's just, it just ain't the same. I don't know if you can tell. It's ugly. You can't read this neither, but looks like a child did it. And type and personality is kind of like that, right? Like when I'm being asked to act in a way that's not normal for me, then it's painful. And being a historian is something that's not normal for me. I prefer to look forward to what's next. It has served me well when I think about again the life that I lived growing up. I could I'm in therapy, right? I'm always in my therapy sessions. I think therapy is fantastic. It gives me a beautiful place to talk about my problems where people ain't gonna be putting my business in the street. My therapist is sworn to secrecy. But while I'm in there, what I learned is my ability to kind of look forward to what's next was in some ways a survival mechanism because focusing on what was going on in my life and around me, my family, like you would see a guy one day and the next day he'd just be gone because they were just putting black men in prison. Like there were two things that were happening. People were coming through with massive amounts of money. Next thing you know, somebody got killed. Next thing you know, there was a police raid. Next thing you know, people are in prison. That's what I grew up with. So I understand intimately what it means to live in a state of persistent violence. And that's like my personal interest in KC 360. And for survival, you just don't focus on that. You think about what is going to be true for you into the future. And in many ways, that's what my personality is. It's how I write with my dominant hand. But also, it's a coping mechanism that I developed to just not have no super long memory about things. But when we start talking about things like diversity, equity, and inclusion, part of the reason why I have to fill in the gap is because anyone can do almost anything from a personality standpoint. Like if I broke my dominant hand, I could learn how to write with the other one. Type is like that. You can adjust. But what I've noticed is when people have such short memories, then I need to be the one to remind them. And what I think is one of the most interesting things about the way we've been talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion is that people act like Black folk are the diversity and that Black folk are the ones who are talking to white Americans about what's been happening in this country. I got my lessons about racial equity, racial injustice, systemic challenges around race in North Carolina A&T State University. Almost all Black people. We wasn't talking to nobody white. We talking to Black people. We were in our own houses talking to our own people about our own history. And I didn't feel a need to really be a historian because there were people who were historians who helped me to understand COINTELPRO, what was happening in my neighborhood, what we had to do differently to be able to put the cat back in the bag as it relates to mass incarceration and reel these things back. There were no white people in sight. So when I got to a corporation and there were people talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, by and large, those people were white. And they were white people talking about the history of things like gender inequality, the history of disability exclusion. I worked in a largely creative environment where it was important to talk about how LGBTQ people have been treated throughout history. Black people were like this much of that discussion because I would argue that where I worked, they understood that there was not this thing, there's these different people over here, right? And then everybody else is normal. It's like, no, everybody in the world has something unique about them that makes them different, i.e., diverse, and everyone wants to be included. There's no organization in the world that doesn't want to get the best use out of their people. That's why you pay folk, right? That's why you pay people that because you want them to show up and do their best. It is actually a really dumb idea to have, if you think of people as resources, I don't tend to, but if you think of people as resources, it is a dumb idea to not get the best out of the people who are on your team. But what I think is masterful and why I named this Filter Free Friday Who is Smart today is because I think what Donald Trump has done, former President Donald Trump has done, has been masterful. He spent 4 years talking about a stolen election. And then the people who think they are the smartest made complaining about a stolen election dumb. We talked about them as dumb. When the insurrectionists stormed the Capitol, the way that smart people talked about them was as if they were stupid. But awareness is the first step towards any change event. I don't know if you have ever loved somebody who has struggled with addiction. Speaking of crack cocaine, but if you have, if they aren't aware of what's happening, that they ain't never gonna get clean. And when you are aware of what's going on around you, then you can possibly do something to change it. So when we start talking about who's smart, 4 years, every day, stolen election, I'm not gonna say I lost. And then the academics in the world, like, these people are dumb. People still calling the man dumb now. And I'm saying, who's the dummy? Who's the dummy? Because I talked to a data scientist. There's a person I love, Dr. Ron, and Dr. Ron is a computational scientist. He has his doctorate in understanding numbers. It is statistically impossible to have won every single swing state. It's statistically impossible. Based on the numbers of people who showed up, it is statistically impossible. But how are you going to say that after you've spent 4 years saying that people who question free and fair elections are stupid? See, now you can't say that because now you look stupid. And what's the worst thing for an academic? Is to be called stupid. How do I know that? because I'm an academic, because I am an academic. Do you know how smart you have to be to 4 years beforehand recognize that you are going to take what somebody thinks, feels, and believes and use it against them? I did an entire TED Talk on the topic. It's called What a Pimp Taught Me About Empathy. I lived directly across the street from a pimp when I was growing up. And you don't just get to pimp somebody. That's not how it works. You don't just find some random person and be like, "You gonna go out there and make some money for me, and you gonna come back and bring the money to me after you have done all the work with your physical labor." That's not how that happens. I have to know that you have a hole in your heart. I have to know what kind of words you need. I have to know your love language, and I have to speak to you in that love language so that you don't even see that I'm taking you for everything you got. I have to separate you from your family and friends. And we talk about privilege from a race standpoint all the time, all the time. White privilege this, white privilege that. Very real. We are sometimes too smart for our own good, as my grandmother used to say. But what does academic privilege look like? It looks like saying things like, "Oh, can you believe that they losing their minds on TikTok because they're figuring out that the Affordable Care Act is actually Obamacare?" Well, maybe I am stupid that I didn't know the Affordable Care Act was Obamacare. But Brad, the pimp, Brad goes, most people don't know that the Affordable Care Act is Obamacare. So when I need it to be aligned, I will. When I don't need it to be aligned, I won't talk about it in that way. And some of the smartest people in the world, because they lack empathy, listen to me, because they lack empathy, they can't figure this out. And when I say this, people always go, "I don't know if I'm not, I don't know if I'm not nice to people." Empathy don't mean nice. Empathy means cognitive empathy means understanding what another person thinks, feels, and believes. And one of the best hostage negotiators in the world takes it a step further and says, understanding what another person thinks, feels, and believes in order to get them to do what you want. Well meaning people with naturally high levels of empathy call that manipulation. Empathy should not be used as a tactic. You're right. Empathy should not be used as a tactic. But how effective are you? I'm an engineer at heart, is how my brain works. The numbers don't add up, but I'm also a realist. After calling people stupid for 4 years for questioning an election and storming the Capitol and going to jail, now you can't be the one saying that the election wasn't fair. They took what we thought, they took our privilege, which we believe that we are smarter than everybody else, and used that information and said, "Yep, let's have them put the nail in their own coffin." Next week, my biological father will be 80. And when you get to live to be an octogenarian, all of these things make sense. When I was first joined KC 360, I was on the education committee. And I was on the education committee because I believe that the earlier we start to give the people who have agency over our children every day, 83% of whom are white and female, that we can create, that we can ward off, that eventually we're going to be able to do something about the divisiveness that we have in our country. If I could start earlier, sooner. Yesterday, I switched to policing. I switched to the policing commission. You know why I switched to the policing committee? Because next week, my daddy gonna be 80 years old. And he remembers even far more than I did about living under an apartheid state purely because the color of your skin. I wrote an article on LinkedIn this week about the confusion people have around 92% of Black women voting for Vice President Kamala Harris. Because if you think that means that Black women are the same, your level of awareness is super low. Black women balk at the feminist movement because we have been forced to work historically. And that work, even but 60 years ago, was mostly domestic. And so then when the nation comes out with um, things like the New Deal, who does it exclude? Domestic workers. Who does that mean it excludes? Black people. When you just old enough to know, as Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, that when the skin is the stigma, I can't walk out here and hide my difference. But you can be gay or lesbian and hide your difference. You can be Latinx and be white and hide your difference. You can have many disabilities and hide your difference. America has made the skin the stigma. You know, Isabel Wilkerson uses this analogy in her book, Caste, or she asked the question, what if they had chosen height instead of color? You see, because biologically, color is only as important or accounts for the same amount of our genetics as does our height or our eye color or our skin color. But this entire system is built on skin color instead. But what if they had chosen height? What if they had chosen height? And the people who are less than 5 feet tall, or the shorts, or the ones who are privileged. If you tall, you 6 feet tall, you're not going to be able to hide that. And skin color is that way. It's not. It's a type of difference that you can't hide. And so what you saw with the 92% was Black women saying, listen, I value family. Listen, I value a soft life. You ain't gonna see me out here begging to work. If somebody won't take care of me and I can stay home, I believe that that should be available to me. You Black women understand better than most people that we got to have values and morals for our society to continue, that we need fiduciary responsibility as it relates to our government. It is Black women who understand that Taya Miles wrote a book about finding a slave girl's sack that her mother gave her when she was sold into slavery, and or sold away from that particular plantation. And she talks about what it looks like to be able to hold on to your history when people won't let you. We are current day dealing with banning of books that mirrors what it looks like to rip families apart and not even keep track of their names. That's what we're dealing with. And so when you think about Black women caring about values and caring about women's ability to stay home and wanting to center our God, those are small c conservative values. So why did 92% of us vote for Vice President Kamala Harris? Because the other option was a racist one. The other option was a sexist one. And unlike all other demographics of people, that's a disqualifier. When I talk to Black people, Black people say, if the conservatives could ever figure it out how not to be racist and sexist, they would probably have far more Black folk than they got. But when you're not aware of that, when you think all Black people are the same, you do need to be in somebody's diversity, equity, and inclusion class. And who's the smart one? They've got us saying DEI is the joke. I need to understand any business owner weigh in, but you've got a team of 100 people. 30% of them happen to have what you consider to be some type of diversity. And I would argue all 100 of them have some level of diversity. Some of them veterans, some of them born in rural communities, some of them not, some of them raised with mama and daddy, some of them raised in foster care, some of them raised poor, some of them raised with money, some of them educated, some of them not. Everybody's got diversity. You get two people married to each other, they different from each other. You don't get to claim whether or not difference is there. Now, if you think ain't no racial diversity is there, say that. There's no gender diversity there, say that. There's no country of origin diversity there, say that. But I got 100 people and 30 of them I'm not getting the best work out of because they are being um, held down, held back, treated differently, treated unfairly. I'm losing money. And this is a capitalistic society. And so in a capitalistic society, when people go, I'd rather lose money than to be able to include you, you have to understand that if once you understand that is what people are willing to do, then you recognize that it don't make no sense to sit around talking about ACA versus Obamacare. That it doesn't make any sense to be like, oh, look at his appointments. These people wrote down in a 922-page document that they were not going to pick qualified folk. And we over here, oh my God, he put the World Wrestling Federation's founder over the Department of Education. Well, if you read the document, they said they was getting rid of the Department of Education. So when we are calling people not smart, who we talking about? Is it us for not seeing what they wrote and then holding them accountable to what they wrote? You know, my favorite person, Jim Nunley, said, I ain't never hold you accountable to what I say. I'm gonna hold you accountable to what you say. What they wrote down was that they wasn't putting qualified people in space, that they were gonna fire 50,000 qualified government employees and put loyalists in their place. They wrote it down. Wrote it down. Wrote it down. Wrote it down. And so when I think about how much we value authenticity these days, what we have to recognize is that, like the pimp I grew up across the street from, some people authentically crooks. And just because you don't think it, just because you don't feel it, just because you don't believe it, child, don't you ever think that other people don't think, feel, and believe. And when I was doing an anti-racism class recently, and don't y'all worry, because many people have reached out and said, what you gonna do with your business now that Vice President Harris has lost the election? Well, I started my business in the height of post-racial America. Okay. And I have known since my days at A&T that, look, when you see my face, you're going to think DEI higher. That's why I don't hide my face. It doesn't matter that I have a leadership development company. It doesn't matter that the focus of my work is not necessarily race equity. It doesn't matter, because when people see me, they going to think I don't belong there, and that the only reason I am there is because of DEI initiatives. That's what people think. Awareness is the very first step. And I'm not hiding my Blackness. If you don't want to work with me because I'm Black, that's your problem. It's the equivalent of having a business. You got 100 people and there's 30 people that you like. I don't care if I get the best of them out of them or not. Because my methods work. They work so well, I'll give you 100% money back guarantee if they don't work. So you don't want to work with me, that's your prerogative. But what I will never do is to suggest that effective leadership is not inclusive, that effective leadership does not understand the disproportionate impact that some of your people have to deal with because of their skin color, because they're women. When I'm working in a manufacturing environment, one of the primary things that I'll do is talk about start time for meetings. Why? Because daycares don't open at 6 a.m., so I can be there at 7. And who's responsible for taking people to daycare in this society? By and large, women. And so if you say we having a 7 o'clock meeting, what you just did was put a lot of pressure on your women who have to drop their kids off at 7 a.m. That's what you just did. That's a diversity issue. that also is good, solid leadership to know that, right? And what difference does it make if the meeting starts at 8 versus 7? Why'd you pick 7? Just helping people to think differently about that so that they can create an environment where everybody feels like they belong. And when I think about what it looks like to recognize that Brad taught me, Brad in that very violent environment, 64110 taught me that I can think smart, I can think good, I can think inclusive, I can think all of those things. But everybody don't think that with me. And when I was doing that race equity session, I used one of Isabel Wilkerson's example of height. And I had people think about if height was the choice and what would they want to happen if all the systemic things that happened against them because they were tall. One person, after hearing all that, said, well, folk need to talk nice. The talls need to talk nice to the shorts because they ain't gonna be able to bring them along if they don't talk nice to them. Is that right? Is that right? Because I would argue that based on what we have been taught to believe about Dr. King, now this ain't right. You go back and look at some of his speeches, listens to his words. The man, he was just speaking the truth, and ain't nobody ever thought speaking the truth equal nice. Ain't nobody ever thought that. In fact, if I go back to Myers-Briggs and I think about how I'm inherently designed, the fact that I am honest is juxtaposed against people who are tactful. The idea is that nice is not overtly truthful in general. The man was telling the truth. And what did it get him? A bullet in the head. Very nice man. Gave all his money away to the movement. And it got him a bullet in the head. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because in every single space you're in, you're a leader. And you need to be aware of it. This is not my desire. My desire is not to be the historian. There are much better people who can tell the history of what has happened in this country. I'm not a historian. I like to write with my right hand, but I have to be a historian because we only remember to last week. We can't even go back 10 years and recognize that when people were telling us the Tea Party was saying we do not like the demographic changes in this country, and they were saying that overtly when Ku Klux Klan members were marching through Charlottesville and killed my friend Susan Bro's daughter, Heather Heyer. We like this year when we're talking about why we lost, why the election was lost, and why it was lost to a person with lesser qualifications. We say it was economic anxiety. We can't remember. And so my job becomes helping us to remember. And when I think about the 20% reduction that we have had in homicides in Kansas City this year, because no matter what we do, if we are not safe, it ain't gonna work. If somebody thinking about whether or not they're gonna get killed, it ain't gonna work. KC 360, I believe, has been a critical component of that. And at the same time, we have to acknowledge that the whole idea of policing was based off of slave patrols. That the way to keep Black people down was to have white people who were poor and who needed money to police our bodies. And once you understand that, you understand the Botham Jean verdict this week. What if you understand that, you understand driving while Black and the racial profiling that happens in my city and happens all over everywhere else. When you understand that, you understand how the concept of creating equitable space where everyone feels included is bad. And if you don't understand that, I don't know how you're going to be a good leader. And so if I don't do anything, I do this. And it is help people lean into inherently who they are to do their part in the world because that's what they can control. And do not look away. Raise your level of awareness, because if you don't look back at what has gotten us to this point, none of it will make sense. And I'm telling you that if there's anything Brad has taught me, is that you can be authentic and a con man. It's Filter Free Friday, y'all. We got plenty work to do.